Way back to bed, if you're really honest about it, is nowhere near as complicated as people would like you to think. There's this weird thing that happens in the lucid dream community where people take a really simple idea and then make it unnecessarily complicated. So there's none of that here today. And to be frank, you can barely even call wake back to bed a technique. What is it? Well, here are the steps. You get up in the middle of the night and then you go back to bed. That's it. Can you really call that a technique? I don't think so, but a lot of people do and they like to give it an acronym. The reality is, wake back to bed is just another word for getting up in the middle of the night. So here are the things you actually need to know about wake back to bed. Firstly, where did it come from? Well, there's arguments about this, but essentially there was one piece of research by Dr. Stephen LaBerge where he discovered that if you woke up at the normal time in the morning, stayed awake for an hour, and then returned to bed for a nap, you would have a higher chance of lucid dreams. Now, a forum user took that idea and then decided, well, maybe if you get up at any time in the night and go back to sleep, that might increase your chances of a lucid dream. So that's the origins of wake back to bed. So when do we actually get up? When is it useful to wake up in the night? And this is where it all breaks down into speculation. The only data we have is that from Dr. LaBerge, who realised that if you stayed awake after your normal wake time and then had a nap, that would increase your chance of lucid dreaming. But that isn't wake back to bed. Wake back to bed requires you waking up in the night. So what we do know is the first 4 hours of sleep, there's very little REM, so there's not much point waking up in the night then. The final 4 hours of sleep is when the majority of REM dreaming sleep occurs, so if you want to interrupt your sleep and wake up and return to bed, then doing so in the final 4 hours of sleep is your best chance. And the nearer you do that to your normal wake time, the higher the chance that you'll fall back to sleep into REM. And how long do you stay awake? Well, again, this is pure speculation. All we have to go on is Dr. LaBerge's data, and he found that half an hour to an hour of wakefulness seemed to be the sweet spot for morning naps, so we can only assume the same would be true for interruptions in sleep in the middle of the night. So you wake up after 4 hours sleep, stay awake for half an hour to an hour, and then go back to sleep. Now here's the tricky part, and this is why I think that wake back to bed can't really be called a technique. When there have been studies into sleep interruption, including Dr. LaBerge's morning naps, the interruption also was used with another technique, normally mild, the mnemonic induction of lucid dreams. Then it increased the chances of lucidity, but if they didn't use another technique, wake back to bed or morning naps didn't really increase your chance of lucidity at all. So wake back to bed is less of a technique and more of a platform from which to use another technique. So if you want to boil wake back to bed down to its most simple premise, it's this. Get up in the middle of the night when you're likely to be having dreams, do a technique and go back to sleep. So the idea is that you're just freshening your mind a little bit, being a little more clear-minded before you return to sleep to try any lucid dreaming technique. So wake back to bed is basically getting up in the night. So you might wonder, why has something as simple as just getting up in the night become an entire technique that people talk about with its own acronym? And frankly, this is just the nature of lucid dreaming communities overcomplicating things. Wake back to bed is just interrupting your sleep, trying a technique, and falling asleep again. Nothing more esoteric than that. But one thing is really important to know about wake back to bed or sleep interruptions is that doing it regularly will be bad for your health. Consistent, healthy sleep is vital for physical and mental health. So sleep interruptions really shouldn't be tried very often, if at all. Personally, I don't think they're necessary. I think it's much better to stick with Dr. LaBerge's research and just sleep the entire night, and if you can, get up for an hour, return to bed for a nap, and then try your technique then. That is what the data shows. That is a time when you're very, very likely to enter straight into REM, so wake back to bed isn't really all that necessary unless you're a very deep sleeper and you find you need a nudge to make techniques work. And one more thing before we wrap up. All of the hype surrounding Wake Back to Bed is just that. It's hype. There's basically no data to say that it's very useful, other than the very few studies where they showed that when it was used alongside another technique, it increased your chances of lucid dreams. But you could equally argue that it was the other technique that was effective because when done on its own, not much happened. So don't believe the hype. Don't unnecessarily interrupt your sleep. You're probably going to have natural awakenings in the night anyway. Use those instead if you can, and really focus on morning naps. That's where the magic happens. Wake Back to Bed is a prime example of something really simple, waking up in the middle of the night, being turned into something esoteric and complicated and really just a bit silly. What we do know is that if you wake up normally, stay awake for an hour, go back to sleep and try to perform mild, you'll increase your chances of a lucid dream. That's the data.